ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Is it only love that hurts that much? Is there any hope in the midnight, son? I just want to feel you again, but I'm losing touch. Thank you, Jenna, for your courage. Thank you, Brandon, for your beauty. Thank you for asking the question and reminding us that it's really the only question that really matters. The question of why. Why the pain? Why the struggle? Why the injustice? Why the suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? And where is God in the midst of the tragedy? These are not abstract questions. These are reasonable questions. They're questions that, even though they're difficult for us to wrestle with, they're necessary questions for us to ask. They're necessary questions because it's illogical. It is illogical for us to believe that there is a God in heaven that is good and loving, and yet we encounter, without looking for it, without reaching for it, it comes to us, the darkness and the pain and the struggle and the suffering. It's a spiritual question we have to deal with. We have to deal with the idea of if God is a loving God, and God is an all-powerful God, and God knows all and sees all and can do all, how can God allow these injustices? How can God allow this pain? How can God sit by while we suffer? It's actually an empirical question. If you believe in the law of cause and effect, if the effect is evil and God is the uncaused first cause, does God cause our suffering? These are not abstract questions. These are not questions that we relegate to some class in philosophy. These are real life, everyday, where we live questions, because the pain is real. The struggle is real. The fear and the failure and the tragedy is unavoidable. And how we answer this question determines how we find our way through. Now, I wish I could tell you that I got it buttoned up for you. I am going to tell you the answer to the question of why is there evil. That's what we're going to do today. It's going to be in a nice little bow, and you can take it home and have everything in a nice little package and understand why there is evil in the world. People have been wrestling with this question since people were able to ask questions. And no one before has ever come up with a complete answer. That's why it's so hard to believe. That's why it's hard for us to believe. And in that struggle, in that search for the unanswerable question, we wind up saying, is it worth it? Is it worth it to even try to believe? Well, I'm here today to tell you that it is worth it. That it is worth the search. It is worth the struggle. It is worth it because the alternative is much, much worse. So while I won't be able to give you a buttoned-up answer on why there is evil, I'll give it my best shot. And then I leave the choice to you. But I don't know about you. Before we press into that, I could pray for a moment. Would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, that you would use your words spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to remind us that the hope is never overtaken by the dark, and that we can always choose hope. Pray that for myself and for my family, for all of us here and for anyone who hears this message, May we choose hope. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. His name is synonymous with evil. His name actually became a label. It has become a label that when you put it on someone, it represents the highest form of treason and the lowest form of betrayal. His word is actually an adjective. It is something that if someone labels you with his name, you know right away that they consider you to be bad, to be evil, to be toxic. If someone calls you a Judas, they don't mean to flatter you. They mean they are associating you with betrayal and treason and treachery because it's associated with perhaps the most notorious traitor in the entire Bible. His name was Judas Iscariot. He was one of the original 12 disciples of Jesus. And even though he's talked about over 30 times in the gospel story, every time that he is mentioned, he is identified by his treasonous behavior. He is cast in a negative light, never more so than by the Apostle John. The Apostle John wants to make sure that anyone who reads the story of Jesus of Nazareth for all time will know that Judas was a bad guy. It's obvious in John chapter 12. In John chapter 12, it's a story that we drove by last week when we were talking about Martha and why Martha had a hard time believing because she had control issues. Not like any of us have control issues, but Martha had control issues. And in John chapter 12, it tells us about a gathering, a party, a dinner party. And it tells us that Martha was there and she was doing what she did, obsessively serving and taking care of everyone. And her brother Lazarus was there, who just the day before had been raised from the dead. And this was a party that was given in Jesus' honor. It was probably a big to-do. Everybody who was anybody in the village of Bethany was probably there. It was full of excitement and celebration because Jesus had raised a man from the dead. It was all happening. This was happening. The Messiah was coming, and good was going to win, and evil was going to end. And in the midst of this celebration, Mary, the younger sister of Martha and Lazarus, came, and it says that she poured out. It literally means she broke an alabaster jar, a 12-ounce jar of a rare oil of nard, a pure nard, aromatic perfume. The kind of perfume that people who bathe maybe once or twice a year would wear to cover up their body odor. And it was apparently good enough that just a small drop of it could be good for a week or two. And so she took this almost priceless alabaster jar of 12 ounces of nard, and she breaks it, and then she wipes her hair in it, and then begins to massage Jesus' feet with the oil of nard and her hair. And it tells us in the middle of this moment, which was spectacular in its lessons about adoration and worship and generosity and all of these messages that should have dominated how people reacted, it was Judas. And John makes sure we understand. He says, Judas, oh, by the way, the one who betrayed him, in case you missed it the first 6 times I mentioned it. Judas, the one who would betray him, calls out Mary and said, this is disgusting. This is awful. How could she do this? Do you understand that she just took a jar that was worth 1 year's wages? How much do you make in a year? $15,000, $20,000 a year? No. You make like $70,000 a year is the average household income in America. A $70,000 bottle of perfume. And she smashed it, and she poured it on Jesus' feet. And Judas says, guys, we could have sold that, and we could have fed the poor, because we're all about caring for the poor, aren't we? We're all about that. We're all about helping the helpless, and that's our jam. And John kind of has a parenthetical verse, and he says, no, don't let Judas fool you. Judas was a liar and a thief. Judas was the CFO of Jesus Incorporated. He was the guy who kept the money for the disciples, and he helped himself to some whenever he wanted it. And everybody knew it. Judas was a scoundrel. Don't be deceived by what he says. And in the midst of this moment, when there are spectacular lessons about generosity and worship, spectacular lessons about the priorities of serving others and caring about each other and in the community, there's one lesson that slams me in the face when I read that story. And I ask the same question that Jenna and Tim and Brandon asked. Why? Why was Judas even there? Why Judas? Why was there a Judas among the 12 apostles? You understand how this whole thing worked? Jesus came to earth and he had this plan. And this plan was, I'm going to teach people about the kingdom of heaven, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to invest it in 12 individuals. And those 12 individuals, 2,000 years from now, will have done such a good job in propagating my teaching that in Austin, Texas, in a church called Riverbend, thousands of people will gather because of my teaching. So those 12 people are a big deal. And if you add into that the idea that Jesus knew what he was doing, let's at least give him credit for being at least a halfway decent leader and manager, much less that if you're like me and you believe Jesus was actually God, and Jesus knew not only where these people were from, he knew the thoughts and intents of their hearts. He knew the very numbers of hairs on their heads. You would think he only had to choose 12 of them, right? And get 12 right. Out of a few million Jewish people that lived in that day, all he had to do was find the 12 best of the best. How did he get this one wrong? Was he not paying attention? Was he just like, was Judas such a good-looking guy? They said, I know the guy's a scoundrel, but man, I'd love having him hanging out with us because he's so attractive. I mean, do you think Jesus actually messed up that choice? Why was Judas there? You don't think Jesus knew he was capable of failure? You don't think Jesus knew it was possible that he would betray him? Much less was certain of it? Why Judas? Why is there evil in the best of places? Why do bad things happen to the best of people? Now, there's two considerations that I have to process when I think of Judas' situation as one of the 12 disciples. And the first one is free will, is choice. You see, Judas had a choice. Jesus had a choice. We have a choice. You know what the first lie that was ever told was? The first lie that was ever told was the lie that said, God does not want you and I to have the ability to choose. God does not want us to have free will. And that lie has been propagated throughout human history, and it pushes to extremes. Sometimes it pushes to a spiritual extreme, and the lie that we have no free will, that we cannot choose our own path, is propagated by ideas like karma or fate or predestination. And these are good intended ideas to say God has to have an idea of the end from the beginning. But the reality is they're an exaggeration. They're an exaggeration of God's knowledge of what will happen or what can happen or what has to happen. And it's a complicated thing, but it's an exaggeration to think that we're just cogs in the machine. That Judas was just a disciple because he had to be the one to betray Jesus. And so he was just kind of like a robot. And you and I are just like these mechanisms in the clockwork of God, or bricks in the wall. We have no autonomy, no ability to choose. And spiritually, we exaggerate that lie. And even someone like me, I believe in the sovereignty of God. I believe that God knows the end from the beginning, that God is omniscient and omnipotent. God knows and God is able to carry out God's will. God is God. I'm not worshiping some half-baked God. I'm worshiping a God who is a God above all other gods. So I have to deal with the idea that things happen that aren't the best. How does that happen? Well, it's because we choose that. So how does God remain aware? I mean, I've shared this with you before, my theory of infinite contingency. That God is infinite, and God not only knows everything, God knows everything that could possibly ever happen as a result of every possible decision that every person could ever make throughout human history and all the ramifications thereof. That's mind-blowingly infinite. Well, God. But the point is that we have free will. There's another exaggeration of it. There's another exaggeration, and it's very popular in our day. It's victimology. It's the idea that our destinies are secured by others, that other people predetermine our circumstances, dictate whether or not we can choose our path, whether or not we can choose what we believe, whether or not we can choose our attitude, because we can't, because we're victims. And you do the math on it, you say, well, you didn't choose where you were born, you didn't choose who your parents were, you didn't choose how tall you were going to be, you didn't choose your eye color, you didn't choose, you think I chose this hairline? If I get a choice, I choose hair. Thick, luxurious, curly, dark hair. And we look at it, we say, well, we don't get a choice, I'm just a helpless victim in the machinery of God. You know how I know we are free to choose? You know what the chief evidence of our free will is? It's the existence of evil. Evil is the evidence that we are free. Because you cannot be free to choose if you cannot choose the wrong thing. If all you can choose is the right thing, if all you can choose is the best thing, you don't have a choice. If there's not something that's less than the best, if there's not something that's wrong, if there's not something that's evil that we can choose, then we are not free. How do I know we are free? Because there is evil. And I can make bad choices. And when I look at the life of Judas, I wrestle with, why is Judas there? Judas is there because Judas had a choice, just like we have a choice. And it's the free will. It's the consideration of what does it mean to be truly free. The second consideration is a tougher one. Because this, it's harder for me to explain, because it has to do with our vulnerability. That vulnerability is necessary if we are going to know love. You see, vulnerability is a tricky thing, because we wake up in the morning and we say, oh, I hope this is a good day. I hope things go well for me. We don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, a bus is going to hit me. Oh, I'm probably going to get poisoned by my oatmeal. Oh, maybe there's somebody who does that, but they don't even get out of bed in the morning. All of us have this optimism, this sense of semi-invincibility that we have to carry on, to press into the darkness of the day, to press into the unknown. And we exaggerate that invincibility, and we forget that we are tissue paper in a typhoon. We are fragile. We are frail. We are here for a moment. And that frailty is necessary if we are going to love. Because love requires vulnerability. Love requires risk. Love requires frailty. If you don't believe me, ask anyone who is a parent. Because as soon as you have a child, you realize what true vulnerability is. Because I love the definition of a parent. A parent is someone who walks around with their heart outside of their body. It's the line from Tim and Brandon's song. Is it only love that hurts this much? Yeah, it is. Because the price of freedom, the price of our choice, the price of love is vulnerability. These are the things that indicate to me when I look at Judas' life, and people have asked me, do you think Judas loved Jesus? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I think he loved Jesus. I think he did what he thought was right. He thought he was helping him out. If I provoke him to make a decision to show up as the Messiah, he's going to wipe out all these Romans and all these Pharisees. He's going to take care of it because this is the guy I want him to be. And while you may question whether or not Judas was loving Jesus, there's no doubt that Jesus loved Judas. And Judas was willing to risk loving him. In fact, he gave his life for it. A number of years ago, we took our family. We went to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. And we went and we had a tour in Carlsbad Caverns. You ever been to Carlsbad Caverns? It's a big cave in New Mexico. And we're going down, and we went down on this tour down below where the normal tourists go, and we went kind of spelunking. Isn't spelunking a great word? I mean, it's a fantastic word. How come we don't get to use spelunking more often? I don't even know the etymology of spelunking. Is spelunking the sound a guy made when he fell into a cave and there was water in the bottom? It was like spelunk. Hey, we're going spelunking. But we got to use it more. There's got to be a way. Somebody's got to have a sandwich like the spelunker or something. Anyway, so we're in this cave. And we're going down from where the tourists normally go, and the guide takes us down, and he takes us down this path and into this room, and he turns off all the lights. You have never been in dark until you are in the darkness in a cave with absolutely no light 1,000 feet below the surface of the earth. I mean, literally, you can touch your hand to your face and not see your fingers. It's that dark. The darkness feels like a thing. And he said the original explorers, when they came down into these caves, didn't have exotic flashlights and fluorescent lights and headlamps and all the things that we have. They came down with just a kerosene lantern and a single candle. And in that cave, he struck a match and he lit a single candle in that room. And the room was the size of this one. And it lit the entire room. The darkness that was so oppressive, the darkness that felt like a thing, was completely overwhelmed by the smallest light. See, this is the choice. We don't choose the dark. Nobody chooses evil. Nobody chooses the tragedy. It's not something we learn. You don't have to sit your children down and say, hey, kids, this is how you disobey. Hey, kids, this is how you fail. Hey, kids, let me teach you how to lie. They know how to do it coming right out of the box because we're born into it. We're born into a world of dark and struggle and suffering. And the choice we have is whether or not we are going to hope in the midst of it. Because the darkness will always be there. The choice is the choice of hope. The end of the story in John chapter 12, Jesus chimes in. He interrupts Judas' self-proclaimed righteous speech about giving the money to the poor. And he says, leave her alone. You have no idea what she's doing. She's doing exactly the right thing. Leave her alone. And then he makes a remarkable statement. He says, you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In that moment, he's speaking chronologically. He is saying, there will be a day when I'm going to be taken from you. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to die. I'm going to be resurrected, and I'm going to ascend into heaven. And I will not be here like I am right now. But in the principle, he's saying something to us. He's saying you will always have the dark. You will always have the evil. You will always have the struggle. The choice is not whether or not you choose the dark. It's just here. The choice is, will you choose me? Will you choose hope? Because that's our choice. I wish I could tell you that the answer to this question is easy, that the answer is simply that we have We have free will, and we have the ability to love, and we have the ability to choose hope. And that's why evil exists, and that's why God invested it in the universe. But it's not that simple. No one has figured it out. In 2,000 years of figuring, no one has figured out exactly, okay, why? The question remains. But the point is, are you going to stay there in that? Or are you going to choose the light? And just the smallest light overcomes the greatest dark. Just the smallest hope is able to vanquish, is able to overpower the darkest dark. See, this isn't some abstraction. This is not just some theological musing. This is real life. Because we know pain. We know the struggle. You may have lived a life where it has been insulated from you, but you've observed it. And you know people who have gone through it. And if you've managed to avoid it your whole life, you won't avoid it forever. It will find us. So the question is the right one. Why? The best answer I have for you is so that we can choose hope. The choice is ours. I just want to find out, is there any more light? Every star is a pinhole up in the night sky. Is there anybody up there that hears my cry? Or am I just looking at pinholes in the night sky?